We have
"I
to go
sheltered
now,
you only for
before it's
tonight.
too late.
Leave by sunrise," the cowboy warned the native woman until the wind cut through the plains like a sharp knife, carrying with it the icy sting of winter. Snow had fallen steadily since morning, covering the vast stretches of land in white, so thick that even the faint tracks of animals disappeared within hours. Out here, far from any town or settlement, survival depended on one's skill and wit, and the cowboy knew that better than anyone. He had spent years riding the open plains, braving storms, hunting for food, and facing the unforgiving elements. Loneliness had become a constant companion, one he neither feared nor welcomed, but simply endured. That night he rode slowly, his horse trudging through the deep snow, hooves sinking with every step. He had been scouting the area for a potential campsite, a place where he could rest for the night and keep warm. The wind howled around him, carrying a sound that made him pause, a faint, uneven noise that didn't belong to the storm. At first he thought it might be the wind playing tricks, but then he saw it. A small figure huddled near the frozen creek, trying to shield herself from the biting cold. The cowboy's instincts kicked in immediately. He drew closer, squinting through the snow, careful not to startle her. She was alone, her thin frame shivering violently, wrapped in a tattered blanket that offered little protection. Her face was partially hidden under a hood, but he could see the sharpness in her eyes, a mixture of fear, determination, and exhaustion. She was trying to remain calm, but the way her body trembled betrayed her. For a moment, he hesitated. He was not a man who took risks lightly. Strangers on the frontier could bring trouble, and he had learned the hard way to trust no one he did not know. Yet, seeing her in that state, so vulnerable and alone, something in him shifted. He had seen people perish in conditions far less harsh, and the thought of leaving her to die in the snow made him tighten his jaw. He knew the risk of sheltering her could be high, but leaving her outside was not an option he could morally accept. With a firm hand, he guided his horse closer to her. "Hey," he called out, his voice low but steady against the howl of the wind. "You can't stay out here. Follow me. I'll give you shelter for tonight." She did not speak immediately, only studying him, evaluating whether this offer was genuine or a trap. Survival had taught her to trust no one, but the desperation in her situation outweighed her wariness. Slowly, she nodded, her lips pressed tightly together as if to keep herself from trembling further. The cowboy dismounted and extended a gloved hand to help her onto her feet. She accepted it with a quiet grace, revealing herself to be smaller than he expected, yet strong in the way she carried herself. Every movement was careful, deliberate, as if she had learned to conserve energy to survive the harsh world around her. "Don't get too comfortable," he said gruffly, almost immediately regretting the words as he saw her expression soften slightly at his tone. "I'm giving you shelter for tonight, that's it. Leave by sunrise." She had been alone for weeks, evading dangers she could not even name, and here was a man telling her she could stay for only a few hours. Yet gratitude kept her silent. The cowboy led her to a small cabin, barely visible through the falling snow. It was modest, built of weathered wood and stones, a simple structure with a slanted roof and a single chimney. Smoke curled lazily from the top, evidence that a fire burned inside. The door creaked as he opened it, revealing a warm interior that smelled faintly of wood smoke and dried herbs. "Sit by the fire," he instructed, tossing a log into the flames to chase away the chill. "You'll need it." The cowboy busied himself with the fire, adding more wood and stirring the embers until they glowed brightly. He glanced at her occasionally, noting how she rubbed her hands together, trying to regain feeling in her fingers. There was a quiet dignity about her, even in her weakened state. He had seen many travelers succumb to the elements without showing a flicker of strength, but not her. After a few moments she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you," she said simply, looking into the fire. I didn't know where else to go." She studied the cabin quietly, noticing the small details. The worn floorboards, the simple kitchen tools, the few blankets neatly folded in a corner. It was a humble place, but it spoke of someone who had learned to survive with little and made the most of it. As the night deepened, the wind outside grew fiercer, rattling the cabin walls and making the fire dance. The cowboy kept an eye on her, though he pretended otherwise. He had been alone for so long that the presence of another human being unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Yet he could not ignore the sense of responsibility that had taken root the moment he saw her in the snow. Eventually, he broke the silence. "Name, S. Tom," he said gruffly, not offering more. She didn't need to know anything else, at least not yet. She hesitated, then replied, "Maya." Her voice carried a quiet strength, a reflection of the hardships she had endured. Tom nodded once, then returned to tending the fire. There was a long pause, filled only with the crackling of flames and the wind outside. Despite the tension in the air, there was also a strange sense of companionship forming. Two people, strangers yet united by circumstance, sharing a small space against the harshness of the world. Hours passed slowly. Maya warmed herself by the fire, her thoughts drifting to the events that had brought her here. She had been traveling to reunite with her family when a raid scattered her group. Alone, she had navigated the frozen plains, relying on her knowledge of the land and instincts honed through years of learning survival. The cowboy's cabin was a rare stroke of luck, a small haven in a world that had offered her little mercy. Tom, meanwhile, found himself watching her subtly, trying not to let her see. There was something in her resilience that reminded him of his younger self, back when he had first started riding the plains. He had lost many people along the way, friends, family, companions who had succumbed to the elements or the dangers of the trail. He had learned to harden his heart, to rely only on himself. Yet in this moment a small, unfamiliar feeling stirred within him, an impulse to protect, to care, even if only for a night. The wind outside continued its relentless howl, and at one point the sound of a distant animal, perhaps a wolf or coyote, made them both tense. Tom reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded, while Maya instinctively moved closer to the fire. The tension was tangible, a reminder that the world outside the cabin was unforgiving and full of danger. By midnight, exhaustion began to weigh on both of them. Maya's body was finally beginning to thaw from the deep cold, and her eyelids grew heavy. Tom, sitting nearby, kept a careful watch over her, knowing that once she slept, he would be alone with his thoughts again. He wondered how many nights he had spent in solitude, staring into a fire, feeling the same chill in his bones but without the presence of another human to share it. Despite the gruff warning he had given her, he found himself hoping she would survive the night comfortably, even if it meant breaking the unspoken rules he had lived by for so long. Survival on the plains was never guaranteed, and yet here was someone who had endured far more than he could imagine, and she had made it this far. The fire burned low, and the wind began to die down slightly, signaling that the storm was passing. Outside, the world remained harsh and cold, but inside the small cabin there was warmth, however fleeting. For a few hours, the cowboy and the woman shared a fragile truce with the elements, a momentary reprieve from the dangers of the frontier. As the night wore on, the cabin grew quiet. The only sounds were the occasional crackle of the fire and the soft breaths of Maya, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion. Tom watched her for a moment, then turned his attention back to the fire, thinking of the long journey ahead. He had no illusions about the harshness of the world, nor did he underestimate the challenges she would face in the morning. But for tonight, at least, they had survived together. And somewhere deep down, he knew that the sunrise he had warned her about would come too soon, and with it, the decision they would both have to make. The night passed slowly, but the storm outside eventually eased. By the time the first light of dawn began to touch the snow-covered plains, the cabin was filled with a quiet calm. Maya stirred slightly, stretching her stiff limbs near the fire. The warmth had seeped into her bones, offering relief from the frozen night, but she remained cautious. She knew better than to fully relax. The frontier was never kind to those who let their guard down. Tom had been awake for some time, tending the fire and listening to the soft groans of the cabin as it adjusted to the cold. He was no stranger to long nights, but this one had been different. Having another person inside the cabin, even one he barely knew, had shifted the rhythm of his solitude. He stole glances at Maya, noticing the subtle way she rubbed her hands together to keep warm, the careful way she moved to avoid knocking over the small things he had arranged inside. She was alert, yet weary, a combination that told him she had survived far more than he could guess. Finally she spoke, her voice breaking the quiet. "It's warmer now." There was something about the flames that made even the coldest night feel bearable, a reminder that life could endure even in the harshest circumstances. As the minutes passed, Tom began to prepare a simple breakfast. He pulled a small cast-iron skillet from the shelf, added a bit of fat from a container, and set a few strips of dried meat to cook. The smell filled the cabin, a small comfort after the bitter cold outside. Maya watched him, intrigued by the way he moved with practiced ease, the years of experience in the wilderness evident in every motion. "You cook like you've done it 100 times," she said finally. Tom shrugged. "I have. Out here you learn fast. Fire, food, and shelter, those three things will keep you alive longer than anything else." He slid a small plate of meat toward her. "Eat. You'll need strength for the snow when it comes back." She knew that even the simplest meal could mean the difference between survival and exhaustion, and she ate with a quiet focus, savoring the warmth and the small taste of normalcy. As they ate, the two began to exchange small pieces of conversation, careful at first, probing gently like explorers testing unfamiliar terrain. "Where are you headed?" Tom asked, finally breaking the silence. Maya paused, considering her answer. "I'm trying to reach my family. My group, we were separated. The raid," she stopped herself, not wanting to dwell on the danger that had forced her to flee. "I've been traveling alone for a while now." "You're lucky you made it this far." Even though the storm had eased, another could come at any moment, and he wanted to ensure Maya would remain safe until she left. Together, they patched gaps in the walls with bits of cloth and wood, reinforcing the door and checking the firewood supply. Maya watched him work, absorbing the lessons he shared quietly. She learned how to check for weak spots, how to use small materials effectively, and how to anticipate problems before they became dangerous. "Most people wouldn't bother," she remarked, glancing at him. "They just let the cabin stand and hope for the best." There was a confidence in him born of experience, and she found herself respecting it more than she expected. Hours passed. Outside, the snow had stopped falling completely, leaving the plains a silent, glittering expanse. The sun, weak at first, began to rise, casting a pale light over the landscape. Inside the cabin, the warmth from the fire contrasted sharply with the cold beyond, making the space feel almost sacred, a temporary sanctuary from the challenges of the frontier. Maya spoke again, this time with a question that had been on her mind since she arrived. "Why did you help me? You didn't have to." He wasn't a man given to easy explanations, but something about her sincerity made him want to answer. "I've seen enough die out here," he said finally. "And some things, some people you just can't ignore. You were in trouble and I couldn't leave you there. That's all there is to it." Survival on the plains was often a matter of chance, but sometimes it was also about the choices people made, the small acts of courage or compassion that could mean life or death. As the sun climbed higher, they prepared for the inevitable. Tom's earlier warning echoed in her mind. She was expected to leave by sunrise, and yet neither of them seemed eager to confront that reality directly. There was a quiet tension in the cabin, a mix of gratitude, respect, and something unspoken that neither wanted to name just yet. In an effort to keep the moment constructive, Tom suggested they check the area around the cabin for any potential dangers. Together, they stepped outside, their boots crunching on the snow. Maya observed the landscape with practiced eyes, noting tracks and subtle signs of wildlife, while Tom pointed out safe paths and warning signs of predators. They moved together carefully, a silent rhythm forming between them, each respecting the other's knowledge and skill. They paused near a grove of trees, where the snow had not yet completely covered the ground. "You've got good instincts," Tom said quietly, almost as if admitting something he rarely shared. "Most people would have missed half of this." It was a peaceful moment, rare on a land that offered little mercy, and both felt the strange comfort of not being entirely alone. Returning to the cabin, they continued their tasks in companionable silence, each action deliberate and purposeful. Tom repaired a small crack in the chimney, while Maya sorted the remaining firewood and prepared water from a nearby melted snow supply. They worked together naturally, without much need for words, learning to anticipate each other's movements and needs. The rhythm of survival created a quiet understanding between them, a bond forged not through words, but through actions and shared experience. As evening approached, the wind picked up again, though less violently than before. The sky turned pale orange and the shadows grew long across the snow. Both knew that the night would be colder than the day, and the thought of the coming darkness made the cabin's warmth even more precious. Maya finally spoke again, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over them. "Do you ever wonder if this life will ever get easier?" Her voice was soft, almost wistful. Tom looked at her, considering her words carefully. "Easier," he repeated. "Out here, nothing is ever easy, but you learn to survive. That's the difference. You don't wait for life to be easy. You make it possible to live anyway." There was a wisdom in him that came not from books or lessons, but from years of facing the world head-on, enduring its hardships and learning to bend without breaking. Night fell once more, and the cabin grew dark except for the fire's glow. Tom and Maya settled near the flames, quietly preparing for another long night. This time, however, the presence of another person was no longer strange or uncomfortable. It had become a source of subtle comfort. The quiet moments, the shared tasks, and the unspoken respect had created a fragile bond between them, a connection born of necessity but growing into something deeper. The wind howled outside, but inside there was warmth, and for the first time in many days, Maya allowed herself to feel safe. Tom, too, recognized a change in himself. He had spent years alone, believing solitude was the only way to survive, yet this night had shown him that even the hardest hearts could find value in companionship. And so, as the fire burned low and the night stretched on, both of them understood that survival was more than enduring the cold. It was also about trust, respect, and the quiet strength of standing together against the harshness of the world. They didn't speak of the future, nor did they need to. The bond they had formed in a single day was enough to carry them through the night, and the knowledge that sunrise would bring decisions neither could avoid lingered quietly in their minds. The next morning, the light of dawn spilled over the plains, reflecting off the snow in soft, golden hues. The storm had fully passed, leaving the world quiet except for the distant sound of wind moving over the hills. Inside the cabin, Maya was awake before Tom. She sat by the fire, hands wrapped around a cup of warmed water, letting the heat slowly chase away the lingering chill in her body. Her thoughts wandered to the journey ahead, to the family she longed to reunite with, and to the man who had offered her shelter for the night. Tom emerged from the small corner where he had kept his bedroll, stretching his tired limbs. He had slept lightly, as he always did when someone else was in the cabin, and the quiet presence of Maya kept him more alert than usual. He moved to tend the fire, adding small pieces of wood to ensure it would last through the morning chill. For a moment he glanced at her, noting how the soft morning light made the lines of her face appear gentler, though no less determined. Breaking the silence, Maya asked softly, "Do you always live like this, alone in the middle of nowhere?" "Out here, solitude is safer. People bring trouble or they slow you down. I've learned to trust very few, and those who prove themselves, well, they're rare." Then finally he said, "Not trust, necessity," and maybe something else. His voice was quiet, almost reluctant to admit more. He knew he had made a choice, one he rarely allowed himself to make, and it unsettled him. Maya nodded slowly, understanding the subtle meaning. Out here, survival often forced people to make choices, sometimes difficult ones, and the act of helping someone didn't always come from trust or friendship. It came from the recognition that certain situations demanded action. Yet, the fact that Tom had acted, despite his warnings and his solitary nature, said more than any words could. After a simple breakfast of dried meat and water warmed by the fire, Tom suggested they inspect the surrounding area. The plains could hide danger even in calm weather, and he wanted to ensure that the approach to the cabin was safe for Maya if she were to leave at sunrise. She agreed, glad for the movement after hours of huddling near the fire. Outside, the snow glistened under the rising sun. The storm had left a delicate layer of frost on every surface, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. Despite the beauty, the harshness of the land was never far from their minds. Tom led the way, pointing out subtle signs. A cluster of footprints that indicated a pack of wolves had passed nearby, faint scratches on tree bark that suggested a predator had been testing its territory, and the hidden creeks and uneven ground that could be dangerous if stepped on without caution. Maya absorbed every detail, impressed by the depth of his knowledge. "You notice everything," she said quietly. Tom gave a small shrug, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. "You learn too. Out here, the difference between seeing and noticing can mean life or death. Most people miss the little things." Even though they were strangers by choice and circumstance, a rhythm had formed between them. Tom adjusted his pace when he noticed Maya struggling with the snow, and she shifted her movements to match his, a subtle acknowledgement of cooperation born from necessity. After returning to the cabin, they spent the late morning working on small tasks to prepare for the day. Maya helped gather more firewood while Tom repaired a few areas of the cabin that had been weakened by the storm. Their actions were quiet but effective, and the unspoken bond between them grew stronger with each shared task. During a brief pause, Maya asked, "Why do you keep living alone? You seem capable of more." It was rare that anyone asked him such things without judgment or suspicion. "I've lost people, friends, family, people I trusted. The world out here, it takes more than it gives. Solitude, it's safer. No one to hurt, no one to disappoint." His eyes flicked to the fire, hiding the hint of sadness behind a mask of practicality. Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she offered a quiet understanding, a recognition of his pain without prying. "I know what it's like to be alone," she said softly. "To depend only on yourself because the world won't wait. But maybe there's value in letting someone help you, even once in a while." He had always believed that letting someone in was dangerous, that it risked disappointment and loss. Yet, for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something to gain by letting another person share the burden, if only temporarily. By midday, the sun had climbed high, and the cabin was warm and bright. Maya had grown more comfortable in Tom's presence, though she remained cautious. She could sense the boundaries he had set, the warning that had kept her at a respectful distance. Yet she also noticed the small ways he had adjusted, leaving her food, offering guidance without condescension, and even allowing her to assist in tasks he normally did alone. Each gesture was a quiet signal of trust, a subtle invitation to move beyond the walls of solitude. As they prepared for a brief rest before the afternoon chores, Tom suggested they share stories. He wasn't a man who spoke easily of his past, but he could see that Maya's presence had shifted something in him. "You've traveled far," he began, his voice steady. "Tell me about your journey." Tom listened quietly, only occasionally asking for clarification, impressed by her courage. When it was his turn, he spoke more carefully. He told her about the trails he had ridden, the harsh winters he had endured, and the mistakes he had made along the way. He did not share everything. Some memories were too painful, but he revealed enough to show the depth of his experience and the reasons for his solitary life. Maya listened, recognizing the weight behind his words and the unspoken losses that shaped him. As afternoon turned to evening, a subtle change occurred between them. The initial tension and caution that had defined their first meeting began to soften. The shared work, the stories, and the quiet understanding of the harsh world outside created a fragile bond. They began to see each other not only as survivors, but as people capable of understanding and respecting one another. Tom, who had rarely allowed anyone inside his life, felt a strange sense of ease in Maya's presence. He still remembered the warning he had given her, that she must leave at sunrise, but that command no longer felt entirely right. Her courage, intelligence, and quiet strength had earned his respect, and perhaps even something more. Maya, for her part, began to sense the conflict within him. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on her briefly before he looked away, the small acts of care he performed without comment, and the subtle signs of hesitation when he spoke of the approaching sunrise. She understood that he was torn between the rules he had lived by and the connection that had formed between them. As night fell once more, the wind whispered across the plains, but the cabin remained a sanctuary of warmth and light. They sat near the fire, finishing their tasks and preparing for another long night. Outside, the world was cold and unyielding, but inside, the small space held a quiet sense of hope. Before going to bed, Maya finally spoke the question that had been on her mind. "Do you want me to leave?" Survival and safety were always priorities, yet they were also weighed against human connection, trust, and respect. "I do," she said softly, "but sometimes the rules don't account for what we truly need." The frontier was harsh, unforgiving, and often lonely, but perhaps there was value in bending the rules occasionally, in allowing companionship and trust to grow. He had spent so long fearing loss that he had forgotten the possibility of gain, the quiet strength of sharing life, even for a short time. The fire burned low, casting a warm glow over the cabin as they settled in for the night. Outside, the wind carried only distant echoes of the plains, and for a moment it seemed as if the world had paused. In the safety of the cabin, they found not only warmth but a fragile understanding, a recognition that survival was more than enduring the elements. It was also about the quiet connections that made life bearable. And as they drifted into sleep, each thought of the coming sunrise carried a mix of apprehension and hope. The decisions they would face in the morning were unavoidable, yet for the first time in their solitary lives, both felt the possibility that trust, respect, and companionship could endure even in the harshest of worlds. The first light of sunrise crept slowly across the plains, painting the snow in soft shades of pink and gold. The storm that had raged for 2 days was gone, leaving the world calm and quiet. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned, providing a small circle of warmth against the crisp morning air. Maya stirred, rubbing her hands together as she looked at the glow of the sunrise through the small window. Today, she knew, decisions would be made. Tom had been awake for some time, watching the light change and listening to the subtle sounds of the plains waking. He had spent the night thinking, as he often did, about survival, solitude, and the rules he had lived by for so long. But now, with Maya nearby, he also thought about something he had not considered seriously in years, the possibility of companionship, of someone standing beside him against the hardships of the world. Maya rose quietly, careful not to disturb him. She had spent the night reflecting as well, thinking about the warning he had given her, "Leave by sunrise." She knew it was not just words. It was a reflection of the life he had built around himself, a life of rules, caution, and solitary survival. And yet, she felt a connection that had grown stronger over the past day. A trust had formed between them, fragile but undeniable, and it made leaving suddenly feel impossible. Tom finally spoke, breaking the quiet. "The sun's up," he said gruffly. "Time to decide. Are you going?" She met his eyes, seeing a flicker of something he rarely allowed himself to show, hesitation, vulnerability, and perhaps a silent hope. Tom frowned slightly, looking away as if weighing his own thoughts. "Rules exist for a reason," he said quietly. "Out here, the wrong choice can cost your life. I warned you for a reason. But sometimes the rules don't fit the situation. Sometimes you have to make your own decision." He thought about how safe solitude had seemed and how simple the rules had made life, predictable, controlled, yet lonely. And then he thought about Maya, about her courage, her intelligence, and the quiet strength that had kept her alive in the harshest conditions, about the small bond that had formed between them, unspoken yet profound, about the way her presence had softened the edges of his world, even for a short while. Finally, he met her gaze. "I don't usually do this," he admitted, his voice low and rough with emotion. "I don't usually let anyone in, but I can't make you leave. Not today." She felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something warmer, a sense of belonging she had not experienced in weeks of solitary travel. "Thank you," she whispered. She did not move closer immediately, respecting the boundaries he had set, but the weight of her words carried more meaning than she could express. Tom nodded, still hesitant, but a small change had come over him. The rules that had governed his life suddenly seemed less important than the possibility of sharing them, even in part. "You'll have to earn your place," he said quietly, a faint hint of humor in his tone. "This life isn't easy. I don't give trust freely." "I'll prove it." With every action, the trust between them strengthened, not because it was demanded, but because it was earned. By late morning, the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the snow-covered plains. The world outside seemed calm, almost peaceful, yet they both knew the realities of survival remained. Predators could appear at any time, storms could return without warning, and the unforgiving land could challenge them in countless ways. But now they faced it together. Maya finally asked a question that had been lingering in her mind. "Do you ever regret your choices? Living alone, keeping everyone at a distance?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it kept me alive, made me strong. It taught me to rely on myself when no one else would, but it also taught me what I was missing. The quiet strength of having someone beside you, not because you have to, but because you choose to." His words were deliberate, carrying the weight of experience and newfound realization. Maya nodded, understanding completely. The frontier demanded toughness, but it also allowed for rare connections, fragile and precious, to grow in the most unlikely of circumstances. And in that cabin, against the backdrop of snow and sunrise, she felt that rare connection forming, stronger than fear, stronger than caution, and stronger than the rules that had once seemed unbreakable. By midday, they had completed their preparations, and the cabin felt secure and warm. Tom looked at Maya, noticing the subtle changes in her demeanor, the confidence in her movements, the ease with which she had adapted to the harsh environment, and the quiet trust she had earned from him. It was a trust he had never given lightly, yet he now realized that it was not simply survival that mattered, but the ability to share it with someone who understood its value. "Stay," he said finally, the word simple but filled with meaning. "If you want to." Tom nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Then we'll face it together," he said. And in that moment, the cabin was no longer just a shelter from the storm. It became a home, a place where two survivors could rely on each other, not just for warmth or safety, but for companionship, respect, and trust. The day passed quietly, but the sense of partnership grew with every shared task and conversation. They spoke of survival techniques, shared stories of the harsh winters and unforgiving trails, and planned for the coming days. Outside, the plains remained silent and vast, but inside, the cabin felt alive with possibility. As the sun began to descend in the sky, casting golden light over the snow, Tom and Maya stepped outside for a moment. The plains stretched endlessly before them, beautiful yet demanding. But now they did not face it alone. Together they moved through the snow, each step measured, careful, and deliberate, but also shared. The bond between them, formed through trust and hardship, gave them strength and confidence. Maya looked at Tom, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "I never thought I'd find someone I could trust out here," she admitted quietly. Tom's gaze softened. "Neither did I," he said. "But maybe that's what the plains are for. Not just survival, but finding the rare things that make life worth living." They returned to their small home, ready to face whatever challenges the frontier would present, knowing that they had each other, not just for survival but for understanding, respect, and companionship. As night fell, the cabin glowed with the warmth of the fire, and both felt a quiet contentment. The harsh world outside could wait for now. Inside, they had found something rare and precious. And while the future was uncertain, they faced it with courage, trust, and the knowledge that they were no longer alone. The frontier remained unforgiving, but for the first time in years, Tom and Maya felt a sense of hope. Together, they had discovered that survival was not just about enduring storms and harsh conditions. It was about sharing life, trust, and connection, even in the most unlikely of places. And that realization, more than any rule or warning, would carry them forward into whatever the future held.